JB.
Hey, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining the Journey Builder Deep Dive series. So this is the first session in the Journey Builder Deep Dive series. So in today's session, we have Jacob and Richard sharing about the Marketing Cloud personalization use case and the usage of the personalization activity in the Journey Builder. In the very first session in the fundamental series, we have looked at different activities that are available within the Journey Builder. Among those, personalization activity is one. So we're going to look at that and the Marketing Cloud personalization integration into the journeys in detail in today's session. And before we dive in to today's session, I have a few information to share with you. So this deep dive series has 15 sessions so far lined up. So if we find any interesting use cases, we will be adding that as well. So this session, just like the fundamental series session, this will happen every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 a.m. So we have different speakers lined up and all the events are published on the Phoenix Marketers user group. So I will be sharing that link shortly in the chat. So make sure that you register to all the sessions or the sessions that are of interest to you. So we have next session next Tuesday on 10th of September by Matthews. That is followed by other experts. So all these sessions are recorded and uploaded to the YouTube channel at the MC Learning Camp or the Trailblazing Together. And if you have any questions, please post them in the chat window. And if you have any questions not related to the session, you can post them in the Slack channel. And any other sessions related to the Journey Builder, you can post them there. So with that, I will welcome Jacob and Richard for accepting the invite and coming here to share their expertise on the Marketing Cloud personalization. Thank you very much, Jacob and Richard. I will turn it over to you now.
Perfect. So I'll share my screen for the intros and then I'll jump off of it because my laptop apparently just doesn't want to keep up with me as I move through multiple windows. But first and foremost, thank you, JB. Thank you everyone for joining and folks who are going to watch this recording a little bit later. We're really excited to walk through at least one of the areas from an MCP and Marketing Cloud perspective where we're seeing the two systems work really well together. And so who is one guy talking to you on the call? It's myself. So Jacob Hayes. My title is a fun, long one now. I lead from a go-to-market perspective, Data Cloud, AI. I still do MCP. Really, at the end of the day, I love Salesforce. I love the platform to the point where my wife makes fun of me for how much I like it, and I talk about it too much. But what's really interesting is I wanted to bring along a colleague and a friend of mine, Richard Hamill, who I believe is one of the best TAs in the industry. And so I thought it would be great if he talked with you all a little bit today as well. So Richard, virtual mic over to you.
Hi, Richard Hamill, Marketing Cloud Personalization Practice Lead for ListingGauge. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I've been working with personalization for a little over 3 years now, and so happy to share my experiences.
Thanks, Richard. Okay, and so housekeeping notes, like JB said, as you guys have questions, feel free to post them in the chat. If there's anything else, we do have a Q&A session near the end. We are more than happy to run this like a TED Talk, or Richard and Jacob talk at you all, but doesn't mean that's exactly what you want. So if you see something, there's no dumb or wrong question to ask. So with that being said, I'm going to jump back off the video and we'll start the presentation. All right, so what's the agenda for today? Hopefully you guys, have been enjoying the sessions that JB and the Phoenix Community Group has put together in regards to Marketing Cloud. We're going to do a little bit of a dive into personalization. Now we're going to make some assumptions that the teams and the individuals on the call understand what Marketing Cloud personalization is. If that's a bad assumption, feel free to ask us any questions. But what we're going to try to do in the first kind of bullet here is talk a little bit about personalization and engagement. How do they work together? Why is this a symbiotic relationship of this arrow pointing back and forth? Then we're going to dive into the personalization activity. How is it being used? How to configure it, and some example use cases. And then I feel like the guy for ShamWow commercials, Richard and I will be like, wait, there's more. We'll talk a little bit about triggered campaigns. And why will we talk about triggered campaigns? Because triggers from MCP into Marketing Cloud is kind of the chef's kiss of how all of these things can work together. These two systems are integrated. We will do a little bit of a show and tell from a demo. that is going to follow along on the slideware that we have. And then we'll show some additional resources into QA. Hopefully that makes sense. And with that, let's dive in. So I think the biggest thing we wanted to level set as a starting point is what we see. It looks like my slide didn't update. Ugh, I love an animation, but it didn't come through like I wanted to. So when we look at Marketing Cloud personalization and Marketing Cloud engagement with Journey Builder, the reason why we look at it as a seamless customer experience, so these two tools talking to one another, is there's a lot of great information that you're going to gather from a website, from a portal, from a mobile application, where MCP is going to help you from either the known or anonymous individuals. And you want to be able to pass that information that you know about those individuals who are in your email programs, or that you want to do maybe some lookalike audiences into Marketing Cloud engagement. And Journey Builder is the orchestration engine within Marketing Cloud engagement that's going to tie these two systems together. And so, like we talked about in the agenda piece, we're going to show not only the personalization activity within a journey, we want to show how a moment in time of someone raising their digital hand can be captured by MCP, shared into Journey Builder within Marketing Cloud engagement, and then utilized via omni-channel communications. Anything I missed there, Richard, from your side that you wanted to add in?
No, you summarize it really well. I think the key is you're tying these two channels together, as Jacob mentioned, right? So you have events and actions that occur on your web page or your web channel, and you could send relevant data of that action into Journey Builder for an email campaign. And that's really the key thing. And the other key thing is this capability for trigger campaigns only works with Marketing Cloud. So it doesn't work with any other ESP like Pardot or Marketo or anything like that. So just keep that in mind as well too.
Yep, perfect. Thanks, Rich. And so let's dive into it. The actual personalization activity. So we want to explain a little bit about what the activity does, and then run through a couple of example use cases of how you would use it. So I think first and foremost, what the heck is this thing? And what does it allow us to do? As we kind of talked about a little bit already, where it's allowing the actual activity, allowing us to pass bidirectionally data between what's happening within a journey or within Marketing Cloud engagement, either the journey data or the contact data, and passing it back to MCP. Now, what this does, if you understand the MCP technology, is we can include some custom action names or steps that occur within that journey. So if someone answers or responds to an email and starts a process, we can make MCP aware based off the action that we flow back into the MCP platform. So maybe they don't receive the same sort of communication change on a website, or we personalize their experience based off what we actually know about what they're doing in the journey with the brand or the client. The integration is pretty simplistic, at least from my perspective. And what we talked about, and I'll show this a little bit in the demo later, we do a couple of configuration steps. But again, the biggest component of why you're looking to do the activity within a journey is to, again, establish a single line of communication and having Journey Builder be the orchestration for that omnichannel communication. And you need to make sure that there's a couple of pieces on how we make the integration work. So how are we doing the right identifiers to match people? How are we pulling in the right information from MCP and using the right information within Marketing Cloud engagement? So let's run through the configuration steps. You'll see on the right-hand side, and I will show this a little bit later as well. So within each one of these, I'm trying to also include some pro tips of where I've seen mistakes being made. I'm not perfect, where I've made them myself when using the tool. And so first and foremost, as soon as you open up the activity within Journey Builder, you have to configure a data set. And the data set is a walled provision of similar to a business unit, but within the Marketing Cloud personalization technology. So you want to be able to point to the right data set with the right data. Sometimes that's a prod instance versus a dev instance. Sometimes that's multiple brands have different data sets. The pro tip here is please read the prerequisites. I know it sounds dumb. I feel like a lot of us love to just get in and click buttons in this Marketing Cloud and the Salesforce ecosystem. But make sure you have the right permissions configured to the right user so they can even do the activity at hand or what the business is asking them to do. The next step is to actually look at the action names. And so you'll see when we get into the platform, there's two types. There's either static or they're dynamic. And I've explained what the two are on the slide, so I won't read it directly at you. But how we look at this is if you're going to send in a static variable, make sure that static variable and how you understand it is going to be for everybody who comes into the journey. So it's not going to be dynamic based off of a change in contact data or journey data within Marketing Cloud or a change within the data that could be populated from MCP. So most of the time, and I'd love Richard's opinion here in a second, we like to choose the dynamic data, and that dynamic data type will allow us to go a little bit further down. And the example that I have on the screen is saying, like, if someone's in a welcome credit card journey and someone else is in a welcome mortgage journey, let's make sure that we have the right information between these two, because customers don't typically act in a silo with a brand.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I'd agree with you on that one.
Perfect. Anything I missed there, Richard?
Nope, you got it pretty straightforward. So
Cool. Nice. Then the next step is the identifiers. The biggest thing with identifiers is you can choose multiple, but this goes back to the core design of Marketing Cloud engagement and Marketing Cloud personalization, which is how are you identifying the individual? And for any individual to flow into Marketing Cloud engagement, they have to be known. So make sure you know the right people and you're sending them into Marketing Cloud engagement. Do not send any anonymous individuals. One, that's going to break a lot of your systems. I don't even know how to explain it past that. So really here we look at a couple of different examples. In my screenshot that I took on the right-hand side, I have email address, profile ID, and Marketing Cloud contact key as my examples. You may have different ones. You may have a GUID or a UUID that you've had configured at MCP and in Marketing Cloud so that you're doing a connection point. But again, most of the time you're going to be using the contact key, since that is how the subscriber key is a one-to-one relationship. And so the pro tip here is you want to make sure that you're avoiding having merged records that don't represent the same individual. What does that mean? Is like sometimes we have individuals who are sharing email addresses or sharing accounts as we reach out to them. It's just best practices to really understand how you're identifying a person so that you can send the right message to the right person at the right time. And again, Richard, anything missed here from your side?
No, I think the implication here is the events we're talking about that are coming from personalization into Marketing Cloud are only for known users. So obviously, an anonymous user on your website, right, wouldn't trigger, wouldn't even be qualified for this. So when we say a known user, so it comes down to how does personalization identify the user? In most cases, it's an email address, right? So you want to make sure how your website identifies the user is going to match up with your Marketing Cloud user identifier, and that's what the screen is showing here, right? In this case, contact key or perhaps email address, right? So that's really, you just want to get it in sync, right? Because the trigger is going to send the user identifier over. So here's the user who qualified for this event. And it's got to match up with what Marketing Cloud expects the identifier to be.
Agreed. And thanks, Richard. And then there's a final optional step, but you can send additional attributes. And so additional attributes can be the attributes created at MCP that you want to share over to engagement, or you can share an associated Marketing Cloud engagement attribute within a data extension, which is the dynamic setting here. But you have to make sure that you have the attribute created in MCP to obviously share it back between the systems. So the bidirectional sync here, you can share attributes between the two, which can be very powerful as you gather more information in MCP about someone. To Richard's point, a known individual who maybe has walked through a form abandonment, but you capturing different steps of what they've abandoned in that form, you can capture that within MCP. It would be great maybe for segmentation purposes or personalization purposes in engagement to share that down. All right. I'm going to go back to the chat real quick because I do see some things popping up. So this is a natural break to answer any questions.
I don't see
JB,
any
have you seen
questions
any
per
big
se.
ones?
Oh,
Okay.
Jacob, we are good for now.
All right, perfect. So then let's put this into practice. Let's talk about a couple of example use cases. Now, I want to caveat. My use cases that I've designed here are a little art of the possible, art of the practical. Let's just say that. But we've tried to go through between Richard and I, a use case across retail, fins, health and life sciences, and manufacturing. And so let's walk through each one. How could you use the personalization activity? So I think when we look at it from a retail perspective, maybe a customer completes a pair or a purchase of, in this example, I'm using hiking boots, but it could be widget A, widget B, etc. The journey builder activity, the MCP activity, could analyze data that's already captured with an MCP or data you already have with an MCE about that purchase or something along those lines, and maybe anticipate and provide an upsell opportunity or cross-sell opportunity into the next item. In this example, it's like if they bought the boots, maybe offer them a jacket or maybe offer them a tent, like something along those lines. And then in financial services, I think for us, and I spend a lot of time in financial services, as folks are being onboarded into different programs, it's a really good idea to start capturing the right information about them, especially when they're starting a new investment portfolio, and saying what is the right sort of product mix that we can provide them as a bank or or a lending institution, so that we can say, based off a customer's risk tolerance or even their past behaviors that we know, how can we provide them the right service? And this one's more focused on less products and more customer service. But I'll pause here. Richard, anything that you wanted to add on these two areas before we go into HLS and manufacturing that you think the group would want to hear?
Not really. I mean, I think that the main thing is between these two use cases, right? One, they're both going to have events and actions for them, right? Obviously, I think the key thing for one, you're dealing with commerce versus your fins, where you're probably more dealing with, you know, abandoned forms and stuff like that versus abandoned carts. So that might have a little bit of difference in how you deal with the data because your retail is definitely going to be more, your KPIs are going to be more dollar focused, I would say, in that case. So.
Yep. Yeah, and I think an interesting thing that Richard and I have both seen is, at least for me in the financial services world, we're seeing a lot of financial services institutions, banks, credit unions, etc., trying to adopt a retail focused mindset, meaning they have, wealth and asset management groups that traditionally act in a B2B focus or sometimes a B2B2C focus. But as any of us deal with a mortgage account, a savings account, a checking account, banks understand a good amount of information about us. And if you can talk to the end state customer, something gets really interesting. So an example that I just had was a couple of weeks ago is, as refinance opportunities occur from a credit union, wouldn't it be great to learn more about that as you're maybe working through your first home purchase or trying to change different checking or savings accounts? If you can understand the actual numbers that are being provided by your credit union versus maybe the top 5 or 10 banks in the United States, you can have a better understanding of which actual type of product you're going to choose based off the lending rate or the mortgage rate, etc. So there's some interesting things to talk to your customer like you know them, and I'm seeing Fins start to adopt that more and more. All right, next two, HLS and manufacturing. So in HLS, I tried to put together a use case that would be the right approach without using PII and PHI. Because I think in the health and life sciences world, we have to be very careful and cautious with data and how we talk to a customer and how we market to, a patient in that, vertical. And so for this specific example, there are plenty of healthcare providers who are offering fitness pieces. I know Aetna, Cigna, et cetera. They all offer these different services of Get Wellness or the wellness programs. They understand interesting information about your fitness tips and your health-related articles or pieces that you're reading. How can we provide, again, that white glove experience to say, if you're in that program, here's a couple of articles of what you could read to help, or here's some tips of local gym memberships that we offer as a discounted rate with your wellness program. There's different ways that we're seeing that in HLS. And then in manufacturing, I think a big one that I see is, a purchase of an industrial machinery or any of the big kind of purchases. After that purchase, there typically has to be either a maintenance service package or some sort of warranty components that align to what you're probably doing in CRM and others. And so what we're saying is you can probably look at providing the right warranty option, the right package option, and then providing that actually in the flow of someone purchasing, or at least providing a sales rep the information to, again, provide the white glove experience, the end state customer, a business in a manufacturing way. Same question back over to you, Richard. Anything missing here? Some interesting tidbits you've seen?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. Going back to their previous point, a lot of these industries, we've been on websites in these different industries, and especially for manufacturing and HLS, you're going to get a higher majority of your traffic being anonymous versus known, which is going to basically invalidate them for these trigger campaigns. So just keep that in mind. It's not, it won't be equally distributed as far as a volume of emails coming across through a trigger campaign, I guess.
Yep. Cool. Okay. I don't see anything other questions, so let's dive into the next section. And Richard's going to lead this one. Not to put you on the spot, Richard, but Richard's going to walk through some triggered campaign components and what he views trigger campaigns because they're a key piece of the MCP and MCE integrations. So Richard, virtual mic over to you. I'll run it and talk a little bit about slides.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how trigger campaigns work. And actually, I'm going to kind of go off the rails here slightly, Jacob, and just show the
Love it.
actual demo.
I
So
love it.
I'm gonna steal your share, or actually,
Yep, all yours.
all right. Let's see. Hold on. Share. Here we go. All right. Can everyone see the screen?
Yeah, we can.
Yes.
Awesome. So feel free to chime in if something's going on. But let's talk about trigger campaigns. So I'm within Marketing Cloud Personalization right now. As you see up here, within Personalization. And in there, I have the trigger campaign. So I'm looking at a trigger campaign. So I'm going to bring up an individual trigger campaign. Okay. So the environment we're on, we have MCP configured or provisioned along with Marketing Cloud is also provisioned. Okay. So the first thing we could do is when you do a trigger campaign, you could decide, well, what do you want to do it based on? Segment join or leave, cart abandonment, browse abandonment. Cart abandonment and browse abandonment are built-in features within MCP. They determine based on the MCP cart, or if the session is abandoned, or an event action. You decide what the action is. You also have various catalog triggers based on how you define your product catalog. Whether an item has high engagement, meaning people are viewing it or purchasing it a lot. Products are back in stock, products are expiring soon. If you put that in there, low inventory, price reductions, so on and so forth. The key thing here is you have to have a product catalog that is maintained with the additional metadata of price and inventory count. But probably I would say your biggest ones would either be segment join, segment leave, event action, or cart and browse abandonment would be your most popular viewed ones. In this case, we have an event action where there's an action called a button click. What that action is defined in your sitemap, right? You're saying, hey, when a user clicks a certain button, it triggers off an action called, in this case, Brandon button click, right? You can also set limits on this if you want. For the campaign, there's also global limits as well too, similar to any other web campaign. You can also delay when a user qualifies for the campaign. You can also add targeting for your actual campaign like you can for web and email campaigns, depending on geographical region, if they visited for the first time or not, or perhaps a certain user attribute, like maybe you only want users with a certain company name only to qualify for this campaign. Or users in a certain segment, whatever the case may be, right? You could also dictate if you want an A/B test or a rule-based test. But let's talk about the more important things. So before I go on, there are any questions regarding the setup of a campaign trigger is? We just talked about the campaign itself. We didn't even talk about connecting it to Marketing Cloud. Or Jacob, let's just see if you see anything in the chat and just have me stop. So
Yep, nothing so far. You're good.
So the next part is you have your experience, and for that you have two parts. You have your template as well as your configuration SFMC. So let's talk about the template first. So the template is pretty straightforward. You're just going to choose a template. right? In this case, a template is predefined in the system, and I'll show that real quick what a template is. And so in this case, we have one that's already predefined. You see there's something called a global template. So I click this. There's already one already pre-built for Journey Builder. So we're just going to clone it. And you have a bunch of JavaScript here, right? And generally, most people leave this alone, but you could modify it. Let's say, like if you see by default, it talks about the product object catalog, and you have different attributes: ID, name, image, URL, and price. If you wanted to add something new, let's say, I don't know, maybe like retail price, you would put that in here per se, right? And then the payload will return the results. So in this case, I'm just showing you what a template is, but it's very similar to a template used for web campaigns, if you're familiar with that. But the key thing it's all JavaScript per se, right? And if you know JavaScript, you could probably figure this much out, right? You basically see what it's returning, something called segments, something called additional recommendations, a campaign experience, and the context of the trigger. So I'm not going to go too much into a template editor per se, but within the template itself, you can choose additional user attributes. If you remember from Jacob's earlier slide, when you're defining the attributes, this is what we're talking about. So we're saying MCP is going to send over additional user attributes. Perhaps in this case, you want first name, last name, whatever the case may be. Those have to be separate fields within your data extension that would need to be set over. And it tells you exactly in the setup here what is, what's all going on here. You can also pass over a recommendation with this event action, this trigger as well too. So perhaps, depending in this case, you want to send over a product, whatever recommendations you have in your recipes. And you can also do additional recommendations or additional what user segments are part of, right? So in this case, we're not sending over anything. We're sending over a recommendation in itself, okay? Let's continue. And then we're going to talk about the Journey Builder connection in itself. So the first one is you have a running versus reusable. And what does that mean? So running basically is when a running happens, it's when they enter the journey in the beginning. Like this, it starts a journey in itself. And we'll show that in a little bit. Reusable means you're going to enter some point later on in the journey, like maybe after day 2 in a journey, you can come back into it. A good case in that one would be an abandoned cart journey. So obviously when a user abandons a cart, you want to create a triggered campaign for like, hey, the cart's been abandoned, let's start them on a journey. But let's say on day 2 of the journey, you're going to have a wait event, and you're going to have another trigger campaign for when the user actually makes a purchase, right? And that's going to be a reusable API event. So when a user makes a purchase, there's going to be a wait event in your journey that says, oh, did the user purchase anything? You're going to use a reusable entry source. Say, yep, the user purchased anything. Let's exit them out of the abandoned cart journey because we don't want to send them another email saying, hey, please buy our stuff. And as you mentioned before, we determine what the actual primary key is for this particular trigger campaign, email address, whatever the case would be, and that was defined before. Okay. And then you can basically save it, publish it, whatever the case may be. And let's take a look at the journey itself. And so we have a simple journey here within Journey Builder. We have the entry event with the data extension name, and we have the various, the journey path in itself. More importantly, let's take a look at the actual data extension, what goes on here. So we have the data extension. As you see here, we have the various fields that were defined in the data extension. But more importantly, let's take a look at the records, okay? So we have the contact key here. Let me make this a little larger real quick. We have the contact key, and that's the actual what was defined in the trigger itself. We have the timestamp of when it happened. What type of trigger happened? Was it a cart abandonment, an event action, whatever the case would be. So it's nice is in one data extension for all your triggers, you can have everything flow into the same data extension, whether a cart abandonment, browse abandonment, event action, whatever the case would be. If there's a pertinent segment as part of it's in there, you have the trigger action. This is the action in this case, what happened. Any catalog items that you're dealing with. In this case, it's internal, the trigger campaign ID and the experience ID. And then in this case, remember we're setting recommendations over. And so whether it's a cart, whether it's the actual cart or the product recommendations or what the user is browsing, the what is going to be sent over as JSON, right? And so within MCP, MCE, you would then use GTL or AMP script and maybe parse this out when you're doing your email campaigns or whatever the case may be to figure it all out. And so that's the key thing is you're going to get some data in strings, but really the meat of the data is coming over with as JSON and you need to parse it. So if it's a cart abandonment, the actual cart's going to be in JSON. If it's a browse abandonment, the last 4 pages or categories or browsing would be in JSON. If it's a recommendation, that's part of an action, right? So in this case, we say, hey, this user signed up for an email. They don't exist in Marketing Cloud because maybe the form is not connected to Marketing Cloud. But we know the user signed up for email, and we know we got the username, and maybe we'd also want the first and last name. But more importantly, we could sign up on a journey, and maybe the journey says, hey, thank you for signing up for a newsletter. Perhaps you would like more information on this, or give us more information to complete it, so on and so forth. So that's basically the meat of a triggered campaign. And then finally, if you want to see how your campaign is running, you can look at various statistics for it. In this case, it doesn't show anything, but I think in our screenshots for Brandon, which I'm going to push back with, there's a little bit better statistics for a campaign. But basically, you can see exactly everything about your campaign in itself, how it's running. More importantly, what's being sent over to Marketing Cloud, was it rejected, that sort of stuff, just like you could with any other campaign with an MCP in itself. And with that, I'm going to send it back to Brandon and hopefully figure out how to stop sharing here. So apologies. Oh, there we go. I'm not a big Zoom user.
Good, Richard. So thanks. And is there any questions that have come through? I didn't see anything before we show then a quick little demo of the personalization activity. JB, I didn't see anything in the chat. Did you?
I don't see any questions, Jacob.
Okay. Well, then I will give, while I'm pulling up another screen, if there's any questions, feel free to ask, and I'll show you the personalization activity. Okay. So first of all, thank you, Richard, for walking through the triggers. And so I'll show kind of the other side of it. In this specific example, think of everything that Richard just showed you from MCP and the actual trigger firing into the API event in this specific example. And this specific journey example from my side of the house is a form abandonment. And this form abandonment is actually happening on a fictitious banking website. And meaning like it's either the email sign up, or maybe they're trying to do some sort of learn more about a bank, etc. And so where's the personalization activity? Hopefully you guys have gone through and you've seen a ton of good information from the previous speakers in Journey Builder, so I won't run through the activities. But where you would find when you have the linkage between Marketing Cloud personalization and Marketing Cloud engagement is personalization activity. So the personalization activity can be dragged onto the canvas similar to any other activity. And what we were showing in slideware is the same thing that I'll show real quickly here as it processes, because live demos love to take a little longer. And so from a configuration perspective, you run through the same items that I'd shown. I'll choose one of my examples of a data set, the action names that you would fire over. In this specific example, I'll go a little layer deeper. If this was a form abandonment of an application or a mortgage application, there might be that follow-up email that's sent here is to remind them to follow up with the form abandonment. If they actually start the process and abandon again, or they click through the actual email into something, it's sometimes very helpful to actually add that information back into MCP versus us collecting it again via the JavaScript SDK. And so sometimes we like to send that data back in. And so you can send that static or dynamic information and the action name of started process again. I don't know, making that one up on the fly. Then the identifiers is choosing again. In this specific example, we have email address, profile, contact key, choosing those. And the attributes. The attributes can be, again, these are from my linked MCP account. So maybe I had like, I don't know, different account type that I want to dynamically populate through and actually push into either contact data or journey data. Here's how the activity works. Any questions here?
Not related to this specific journey build, Jacob, but it is a generic question about using the MCP activity within the Marketing Cloud org. If it is not the correct time to segue, I think you can cover it at the end about all the steps required to integrate the MCP and then using that within the journey.
Yeah, we can cover that a little bit later, but I think
Thank
that's a
you.
good question. So cover that in the Q&A. Cool. All right. Thanks, JB. So let's jump back into slides and let's look at a couple more real world examples for trigger campaigns. And so I think from our side, I chose a retail and I chose a FIDS example. So, and obviously Richard, add any additional flavor and color here as we share some of this information. I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed out in the ecosystem is sometimes it's hard to understand where the technology actually fits into a business process or how a customer would want to or a client would want to use these tools. So I came up with this one. Maybe there's a high-end coffee maker who has an online store and they're selling either the coffee or the coffee maker or the beans, etc. And so in this specific example, when we look at not only the activity and the campaign, so the campaign could be maybe after a purchase, we can recommend some accessories. I think that makes sense. We all use Amazon. We know the we know the ways that Amazon likes to upsell us as we buy something, and same with any other store. So I think that makes complete sense to what Richard has shared from a triggered campaign perspective. But then where it gets interesting is again with the activity. How could we analyze not only their past purchases, but potentially that online behavior to then suggest maybe a monthly coffee bean delivery service as we push them through that nurture journey or the post engagement purchase journey? There's can be some really interesting ways to enhance that engagement and potentially get longer or increase the long-term value or customer lifetime value for that person. Richard, any interesting use cases you've seen? Doesn't have to be aligned to the one on the screen in retail. I know you spend a lot of time in that world.
No, usually the biggest one to care about is abandoned browse and abandoned cart. I think the gotcha is also when you're dealing with multinational corporations or e-commerce sites, you have to deal with localization as well too, right? And so that could be a little bit tricky, but especially if you have various locales coming into the same data extension, right? So, but that's the only thing. It's retail's always one of the two. It's sometimes abandoned form, but generally it's they want to know when the cart's abandoned or what their browse. We all get thousands of spam emails for that stuff or from whenever we abandon a cart. So that's usually the two big ones for retail.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And then financial services. I'm a sucker for financial services. I went a step further versus the example that we showed a little bit earlier in the presentation. This one is, I've seen a lot of, again, banking institutions, capital markets and wealth asset management groups. As we as individuals or customers for these institutions reach a milestone, either in an investment account or a milestone as we move through our life. Think of those as different milestones of buying a house, having a child, having the next step of moving from a specific student savings account to a more grown-up savings account as we grow. There's a couple of different interesting pieces for those anniversary moments or those milestone moments where we could use MCP and marketing cloud engagement together. And so for the trigger campaign in this specific example is once that moment or milestone happens, you can do a personalized email. And whether that email is triggered based off of MCP or it's just starting based off a process that's already running in marketing cloud engagement, this is where it could be very interesting to have these two talk to one another. And so that email could be triggered, reaching out on the milestone, and then having them potentially suggest an appointment to talk to a financial advisor. Or thanks for being a 9-year member of a certain credit card. Do you know about a couple of promotional pieces? Like think of those as your examples. And then the activity can follow along. What information have you gathered from within marketing cloud engagement? What additional information are you gathering within personalization? And to take this a step further, and I didn't write this out on the slide, is where it gets really interesting is then adding in CRM and saying, if I can gather interesting bits of information, apparently I need another cup of coffee, as they're hitting those milestones, wouldn't it be really cool to share that with the business banker or with the wealth advisor or with the teller as they're walking into a bank? so that you can better understand where they are versus just, hey, I did a lot of targeted advertising in multiple channels online. You get into the bank and you go, what do you want? Sometimes it's great to actually talk to your customer like you know them. All right, that's enough of a pining from Jacob and from Richard. So we have some additional resources and documentation we'd love to leave folks with. But before I get to that, I want to do a little shameless plug into something that I talk about with every one of my clients, and it's how to approach an actual design of a use case. So Richard and I are showing you a lot of different feature sets within the technology, but the reason why we've articulated the use cases and aligning it to an overarching customer journey for your client or for your customer base is because customer expectations are at a high level. They want to be spoken to on the right channel with the right message at the right time. And so what we're trying to say is introduce the scientific method back in. Scientific method we all learned in 8th grade biology, if you remember that, which is you're trying to test a hypothesis or you're observing something, you're questioning that hypothesis, you want to experiment, you want to see if you actually hit the right results. And so on the left-hand side of this slide, we align this to MCP and marketing cloud engagement to say, hey, if we're gonna, what are we trying to test? One of Richard's examples of we all don't want to get spammy emails after we purchase something. How can we do an A/B test on when to send that post-purchase email with some sort of call to action? And where do you send it from a content experience? What content will you need? What is the audience? And then how many times should it be sent? And then the most important on the slide is how are you going to measure it? Because if you don't have the success for the measurement of what you're actually doing, most of the time I tell my clients, you're not doing the use case. Because how would you know if it's successful? So maybe I shouldn't have said I was done opining on things, but that's my shameless plug. And then finally, we've gathered some of the knowledge-based YouTube videos, additional resources that everyone can have access to. I think it's really important for all of us to share our information. So thank you, JB, again, for doing all these sessions. And with that, going to Q&A. So JB, you said there was one question before?
Yes, coming back to that question, Jacob, it's about can you achieve all these in the regular marketing cloud org? So that's the same question. Richard already addressed that one. Richard, if you want to go ahead and add more details to that, please feel free to do so.
Well, I mean, from my understanding, I think you're talking about it is part of Marketing Cloud, but you need the actual applications provision from Salesforce, right? AKA, you got to buy them per se, or if you have a base Marketing Cloud, you should see everything we're talking about here. But you're probably, if they're not provisioned, you're just gonna have little lock icons there. But it is part of Marketing Cloud in itself, so that's probably the.
Always.
I don't know if I could expand on that so much unless you have more on that, Jacob. So.
No, I think just one layer deeper is if you're going into your account right now and you actually work for the organization and you see the locked icons like Richard's saying, always double check that you actually have the licenses purchased from Salesforce and the SKUs purchased. And if you're a partner who's on the call, you can talk with the account executive at Salesforce to better understand the SKUs that the customer has purchased so that they can articulate the right use case. Obviously, you don't want to recommend anything Richard and I just said. If the client hasn't purchased marketing cloud personalization, it's going to be a little tough to do any of these.
Great. Thanks, Jacob. Thanks, Richard. The next question, can you explain the required MCP configuration to interpret and act on the data pushed over with the MCP activity?
Rich, do you want me to take that or do you want to take it?
Oh, thanks, Josh. Can you explain the required MCP configuration to interpret and act on the data? Go for it, Jacob. Let's see what you have to say on this.
Yeah, okay, cool. So, I think let me try to unpack it. And Josh, if you want to come off mute and see and add any additional pieces here. How I'm interpreting your question is, hey, how are we actually going to act on data and how is the data being shared between the two platforms? Is that correct, Josh?
Exactly. So on the MCP side of things, specifically the attribute configuration, and then as far as what the campaign looks like in MCP.
Okay, cool. So I'm gonna take a first stab at this, Rich. Obviously, add any additional pieces.
Yeah.
I think the first thing I'll say, and I'm gonna be a great consultant, is it depends. There's multiple ways to do things between Marketing Cloud personalization and Marketing Cloud engagement, between the activity or triggered campaigns. Triggered campaigns are now becoming really robust, where you can send a lot of data that you're already collecting within MCP over into a journey that then is obviously captured in that data extension Richard showed. So sometimes you're going to already have the data in MCP and you don't need to duplicate it too much between the orgs, because where are you actually doing the use case output? So if I have the right data and my source of truth to talk about a banner change or a pop out on a website, maybe I don't need to share that data into MCE. But I'll even flip the reverse for a second. But what if you want to do a cross, communication over email, where you want to understand when was the last impression or click from a banner change or from a pop out, to make sure that your email message is more personalized based off of, I already declined, some sort of sign up or something. So maybe we remove that as a content block within our engagement email. That's where I'm looking at it, Josh, but I could be completely off basis with my interpretation.
Yeah, that's definitely helpful. So, just exploring the activity a bit, new terrain for me. So when you push data into MCP from the journey builder activity, that's what I'm trying to wrap my head around, is the value of that data being pushed back to MCP. So the triggered campaign from MCP into the journey, clear on that. But as far as what you do with that on the website, more or less.
Yeah. Richard, do you want to take that second piece? Or do you want me to answer that?
Yeah. So you're keep in mind you're updating a data store with an MCP, and then depending on what you have triggered in your campaign. Let's say you have a campaign triggered when a user's loyalty points are greater than 500. They'll show this web campaign, right? And so what's going to update that metadata field of loyalty points, right? It could be something in Marketing Cloud, it could be something in CRM, whatever the case may be. But it basically, MCP does real-time personalization. So when your data field's updated, and the next time the user comes to your site or the session, if they refresh the session on a page load, whatever the case may be, it's going to take a look at it's always going to look at the user data, and if they qualify for the campaign, it's going to trigger that campaign. And so that's one way MCP would react real time based on data coming in from whether it's MCE or CRM, whatever the case may be. Is that kind of answer what you're talking about, Josh?
Yep, spot on. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, because remember, it's a stateless system. It's the web, right? It's not like you say, I'm going to push this over, and the user is going to automatically. It's not like a real-time chat system or something like that. It's just going to update the data store in MCP, and then the next page load, because it's stateless. The next time there's a refresh, the user in the session, it's going to qualify for any campaigns, and so that data could be used as a campaign qualifier or disqualifier in that case, right? Maybe they saw a pop up, and their loyalty points went too low, and now they refresh the page and the pop up doesn't show anymore, right? Depending on what your rules are in the campaign, right? So that's really how it works. You're updating the data, and then that data could be used for real time campaign targeting within MCP per se, or push them in and out of segments internally that have nothing to do with campaigns, right? Perhaps there's a segment that the marketers use that they ultimately use it for something else, maybe a high engagement distribution list or something like that, right? So
Yep. I don't want to add anything to it other than just Josh, interoperability between the two systems. That's where the activity comes to play more, and then everything that Richard just said. So hopefully we answered that. Good question. Josh gets the prize for asking questions. So good job, along with Ogo.
Thank you.
All right, and
can you touch upon a data cloud use case along with the MCP and MC?
I was waiting. I had an over under of when someone would ask data cloud. I did not have it the 51-minute mark though, so I lose my own bet. I'm more than happy to take this, Richard, unless you wanted to add any color to it.
please, no, yeah, you got the fancy title. Please take it. So
love it. I think we've done a full session in the past, and I think I even did one with JB and the Phoenix group on MCP and Data Cloud, how they work together with the connector and pieces. I think a simplistic answer to it And I'm going to remove the MCP cannot do currently statement in that question. I'll start with the first part. Data Cloud is collecting probably a lot more information than you would want to push into personalization. Personalization, to what Richard and I have explained, is a real-time interaction management platform. It's not a data warehouse or a data store or a data mart, let's just say that, where it's going to collect every bit of information from a PIM, from a transactional database, etc. Data Cloud gets really interesting is that it's going to capture information from multiple different channels, and some of those channels are just or either legacy systems that are going to be pushing data into CRM or from third-party advertisers, etc. But there's a time and place of where Data Cloud collects information, and then how do you pass that data back into MCP? That's where the connector plays. And so if I bubble it back up to a use case, if I'm collecting information about what someone has done, I don't know, based off a lookalike audience, where I'm passing back that data into Data Cloud, but I want to be able to augment the segment that I've built in personalization so that I provide a better experience on a website or a portal or a mobile app. That's where, again, interoperability between the systems is where is the source of record of that data. Sometimes it's now going to live in Data Cloud. Provide that back to MCP to augment a segment or personalize the actual audience itself. That's how I would attack that, at least from a high level. And then the second part of what MCE cannot do currently, it's a bit of a loaded question, but a good one. There's been a legacy way of how we've worked within the Salesforce ecosystem for a while. Marketing cloud engagement, I've dealt with plenty of customers where we do event-driven architectural models where we pump in a ton of data into data extensions. Marketing cloud engagement is a fantastic platform that can scale via its flat table structure. Given where the Salesforce ecosystem is moving with technology, that's going to be less of the right path, let's just say, to move forward, where Data Cloud is not now going to be that system of insights that then is going to talk to your system of engagements, which is Marketing Cloud or other Salesforce systems themselves. So just be careful how you build, especially given updates, which I'm sure you'll hear at Dreamforce and others of storage consumption, etc., in Marketing Cloud engagement. And I think that's enough of me towing the line as well as the tightrope. Richard, anything you want to add there? I'll put you on the spot again.
No, I mean, it's a bit of a loaded question. There's really no interesting use cases with MCP, with Data Cloud that MCE cannot do currently. You, all the data that you send from MCP into Data Cloud, you can technically send it all into MCE, right? And then do something with it. And vice versa. Any activated segments or activations within Data Cloud that you send into MCP, you can do similar from MCE into MCP, right? So you got to remember MCP was created long before Data Cloud existed, and that's the way it is today. And that's probably the best I could say it. So, with the emphasis on today.
Yes, I think that last statement of today and not forward looking is the big critical component there.
Yes.
But obviously, feel free to reach out to Richard and I if you guys have any other questions. You can find us either on Slack, partner communities, etc. Yes, you can find us.
Walking the streets.
Love it. JB, is there any other questions in the chat?
You did a great job. Thank you both. Everyone, you have access to unmute and ask any questions. If anybody has any questions, we'll be here for a couple more minutes. Let us know if you have any questions.
Yeah, I had one question, mostly in regards to just, I guess, field alignment. Is there any sort of standard set of fields that are required, or is it kind of just you can create and bring over any fields from MCP into Journey Builder?
Richard, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, there are certain fields that are required, and it's basically in the template itself. So I want to say it's like, I don't have the screen up anymore, but it's like email address, catalog items, the event action types. Like it actually says it within the template what fields are required in there, but there are a couple in there. And so your data extension for there, well, not in ampersand. Go back to your data extension field definition. Hold on. Go back to the previous screen, Jacob.
Yeah.
So you can't see it, but in optional settings, on the left there, it tells you exactly what fields you need in the text. Yeah, that part up there. Yeah, it tells you what fields you need by default. But and so a lot of times, what you're going to get is that the fields aren't there. You'll get the errors when it doesn't sync over there. But basically, it's kind of funny when we create the data extensions for trigger campaigns. We basically always use the same format. Like we just have a template that we use for our data extension that covers like all the triggers per se. And then so you're not gonna, once you get this down and say, okay, this is the data extension I like, you can just create it, make it as a package, and do it that way. But it gets tricky when you're doing the user attributes, right? Because you can have one client can have, so you probably don't want to push too many attributes over because usually most of those attributes already exist in MCE. But so it's a bit tricky. But generally, they're like 80% of it's always the same, and that last 20% is the different user attributes that you might put in there.
Yeah. Be careful with source of record and source of truth of data, to Richard's last point. If you're capturing an email address or a first name or something within a form from MCP, is that going to conflict with what you have within Marketing Cloud Engagement? So it's always good to have a governance structured strategy of what data from what source wins. Don't just collect data to collect data.
We got a minute. Vivian asked a question on Jacob. In your personalization activity using the case study of an abandoned mortgage application, which is a great use case. Was the entry event you showed in the template in a journey, or was the entry event you showed in a journey or built from scratch? Basically, want to know, was it built from scratch or was it something already predefined?
It was exactly what Richard was showing with the triggered templates. We used the triggered campaign within Marketing Cloud Personalization to send the API. And then that API message was obviously triggering the actual journey itself to send the email. So that is something you would be building from MCP. So it's not something built from scratch.
Yeah, and real quick, I mean, form abandonment's a classic case, and so you notice there wasn't like a drop down called form abandonment, right? I mean, because what is a form abandonment, right? I mean, it varies, right? But you have a mortgage application, right? So clearly, it's probably gonna be a segment join, and the segment's gonna be users who started the form and users who did not finish the form, right? And so you're gonna have to have an action for when they started the form. What does that mean? Maybe when they enter a field, like the very first field in the form, like first name or whatever. And then you want an action when the users submit the form or complete the form. Maybe that's when they click the submit button, right? And so users who don't have both steps, or who only have step one but not step two, those are users who quote unquote abandoned the form, right? And that's a segment you want to create in MCP and say, hey, we have users who started this mortgage application but never finished it. Let's go ahead, and we know who they are based, maybe you're capturing email address from the form itself. Let's go ahead and they qualify for the segment, in which case, and there's a segment join action within MCP. And perhaps you want to make that like, I don't know, give it a 2-hour window. I don't know, depending how long the form is, right? Before you actually qualify for the segment. Give them time to fill out the form. So that's how you do a form abandonment within MCP and push it over. MC, you might keep in mind, MC has no knowledge of like web stuff, right? It doesn't know. I mean, and what is a form abandonment? It's like saying how long is a string, right? What is it, right? Just keep that in mind. The term form abandonment varies per client, but you got to remember that in order to send anything over to MCE, you got to get the email address or you got to know who the user is, right? Otherwise, MCE is not going to do anything with the record.
Yep. Thanks, Richard. All right, JB, I think we're over time, but we really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's great. And thanks for sharing your insight, Jacob and Richard. Thanks everyone for joining, and we hope to see you again next Tuesday, 8 a.m. That will be the session by Matthews on the Salesforce CRM integration with Marketing Cloud with MC Connect. We hope to see you again. I'll be sharing the recording soon. Thank you. Bye.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good rest of your day.